Did you know that, in the heart of ancient Rome, a pirate brought the entire city to its knees without an invasion, without swords, just by making people hungry? That's right. Rome, the city that crushed kings, outlasted Carthage, and watched emperors get stabbed in their own boardrooms, was nearly defeated by its own stomach. And the one responsible wasn't a decorated general or a scheming senator. It was Sextus Pompey, a man with a noble last name, but a pirate's career path, straight out of Pirates of the Caribbean. He didn't just command a rebel fleet. He discovered a fundamental flaw in the Roman system. If you control the bread, you control the republic. Simple as that. Because Rome might have been mighty, but it still needed to eat. Every single day. And guess who positioned himself right at the choke point of that supply chain? Yep, Sextus, with his fast ships, probably a scruffy beard, and the kind of strategic mind that would make even Captain Jack Sparrow pause and applaud. But don't think this is just a tale of glamorous piracy. In the middle of this chaos, we've got betrayals that make Game of Thrones look tame, political deals with built-in backstabbing, massive naval clashes, and a Roman system slowly collapsing under its own weight. Think V for Vendetta, but with togas and triremes. Stick with me until the end, because beyond the twists, ambushes, and high seas action, this story shows how one so-called outlaw became the mirror of a republic in crisis. And how, sometimes, the difference between a hero and a villain is just who's telling the story. But who exactly was this man who scared Roman generals and became a people's icon? Let's meet the pirate with a noble surname. Before he was the terror of Roman trade routes, Sextus Pompey was just a kid with an impressive last name and a front-row seat to one of the bloodiest episodes in Roman history. His father? None other than Pompey, the great military genius, one-third of the first triumvirate, and Julius Caesar's ultimate frenemy. You know, the kind of guy who gets cities renamed after him, until he ends up decapitated on a beach in Egypt. Which, unfortunately, is exactly what happened. Sextus was a teenager when Caesar and his dad went to war. While Caesar marched on Rome and Pompey scrambled to raise legions, Sextus learned one brutal truth. In Roman politics, loyalty is temporary and family ties don't stop blades. After the defeat and death of his father, Sextus became a fugitive, hunted by Caesar's allies, stripped of wealth, power, and purpose. Honestly, it's giving Zuko from Avatar vibes, disgraced legacy kid, trying to figure out who he is in a world that wants him dead. At first, he wasn't aiming to be a pirate. Sextus didn't wake up and say, "I want to live on boats and raid merchant ships." He wanted revenge. He wanted justice. But mostly, he wanted survival. And when Rome branded him an outlaw, he leaned into it. What starts as a resistance movement slowly evolves into a maritime rebellion. Picture Kylo Ren with a trireme, or Edward Kenway from Assassin's Creed 4, a man torn between his heritage and the ocean that gives him freedom. He rallied the remnants of Pompey's loyalists, ex-slaves, mercenaries, and those disillusioned by the chaos in Rome. With nowhere to go on land, he turned to the sea, and there, he found not only refuge, but power. Real power. The kind that comes with sails, speed, and leverage. But he didn't need a sword to threaten Rome. Just grain. And Rome without grain? It's just a really expensive pile of stone. Yes, Rome was powerful. But it had one very down-to-earth weakness: hunger. The city was bursting with people, and feeding that crowd was practically a military operation, and bread kept the peace. And where did that bread come from? 3 main places: Egypt, Sardinia, and good old Sicily. Now imagine what happens when a guy with fast ships, a chip on his shoulder, and nothing to lose takes control of Sicily. That's right. Sextus Pompey turned the island into a floating fortress. With his fleet, he blocked grain shipments, intercepted merchant vessels, and basically slapped an embargo on Rome's food supply. If you've ever played Total War, Rome 2, you know, cut the supply lines, and the empire crumbles faster than a dry biscuit. The result? Chaos. The Roman people began to starve. Bread lines grew, prices skyrocketed, and discontent turned into outright fury. But here's where Sextus gets clever. He didn't just block the food, he let some grain shipments through, with his name on them. The message was crystal clear: Octavian isn't feeding you. I am. And it worked. His propaganda landed like fresh bread on empty tables. Sextus stopped being a rebel and started becoming a maritime Robin Hood, the pirate who made the bread arrive. Meanwhile, Octavian? He became the guy who let the people starve. It was like Snowpiercer meets the Hunger Games, and the people were cheering for the pirate district. Sextus's popularity surged so high, it started to feel like a real political threat. The public booed Octavian in the forum while praising the grain hero who ruled the waves. At this point, Sextus wasn't just winning at sea, he was winning hearts. And guess what Octavian did when he realized losing the public's support was more dangerous than losing a war? So, Octavian was stuck. The people were hungry, angry, and weirdly obsessed with the guy who was technically an outlaw. Not a great look when you're trying to sell yourself as the savior of the Republic. Fighting Sextus wasn't working, and ignoring him definitely wasn't working. So, what's left? Negotiation. And here's where things get cinematic. Picture this: 39 BC, the Bay of Naples with two massive wooden platforms floating just off the coast of Misenum. On one side, Sextus Pompey, son of Pompey the Great, self-made pirate king of the Mediterranean. On the other, Octavian, heir to Julius Caesar, the guy Rome was supposed to love. Between them, water, mistrust, and a whole lot of tension, and no one dared step onto the other's platform. Because, poisonings, stabbings, and oops, I tripped and fell on your dagger were all still very much in fashion. And yet, against all odds, they struck a deal. The Treaty of Misenum. Sextus demanded, and received, some serious concessions. Control over Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. Official recognition as the ruler of those territories. And naval supremacy in the western Mediterranean. In return, he'd stop the blockade and supply grain to Rome. Yes. The pirate became the supplier. Rome, with all its temples, legions, and marble pride, was now dependent on a guy it had tried to kill a few years earlier. For a brief, bizarre moment, Sextus was no longer an outlaw. He was legit and recognized political player. It's giving Narcos vibes, but ancient. Or the Mandalorian if the bounty hunter negotiates peace with the Empire over a shared love of bread. But let's be real, Octavian didn't walk away from that table with a smile because he respected Sextus. He walked away smiling because, behind the curtain, he was already building something. So, while the Roman people chewed on bread delivered by a pirate, Octavian chewed on something else: revenge. Because make no mistake, shaking hands with Sextus Pompey didn't mean forgiving him. It meant buying time, and Octavian didn't just want to beat Sextus. He wanted to erase him. Enter Marcus Agrippa. If Octavian was the face of the operation, Agrippa was the brain, and the muscle. Imagine Brienne of Tarth with an engineering degree. Agrippa wasn't just a general, he was a genius with blueprints. And he had an idea: if they were going to win the next round, they couldn't just fix Rome's navy. They had to reinvent it. That's how Portus Julius was born. Hidden in the Bay of Naples, this secret naval base was the stuff of spy thrillers. Agrippa connected two coastal lakes, Avernus and Lucrinus, and opened them to the sea, turning them into a clandestine training and shipbuilding facility. Think of Game of Thrones Season 2, when Davos is sneaking boats past Stannis' enemies, but with more real estate development. While Sextus basked in his momentary legitimacy, Octavian and Agrippa were quietly building a modern fleet with new ships, better crews, and tactical innovations. It was like House of Cards, but naval edition, political smiles up front and daggers drawn behind the scenes. Meanwhile, in Rome, everyone thought things were chill. Grain was flowing again, Sextus had calmed down, and Octavian looked presidential. But beneath that surface calm, something massive was brewing. Because as soon as the fleet was ready, so was war. Hey, Discovers, real quick before we dive back in, I've got a small favor to ask. If you're the kind of person who loves a good story, the real ones, with epic battles, wild mysteries, unforgettable characters, and lessons that still echo today, then this channel is for you. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we explore history in a way that's curious, smart, and surprisingly fun. Because understanding the past has never been this interesting. When Octavian finally gave the green light, it wasn't just a war, it was a full-on naval spectacle. The fleets launched, the sails unfurled, and Sextus Pompey realized, maybe a little too late, that Rome hadn't forgotten how to fight at sea. The centerpiece of this showdown? The Battle of Naulochus, 36 BC. It wasn't just a clash of ships, it was a clash of visions. On one side, Sextus, the rebel pirate turned people's champion, sailing with his old-school charisma and well-worn tactics. On the other, Agrippa, the ultimate flex of Roman logistics, commanding a shiny new fleet built in secrecy and trained to perfection. And guess what? Strategy beats swagger. Agrippa didn't just outgun Sextus, he outmaneuvered him. He installed spike chains across the water to stop ramming attacks, used Corvus-style boarding tactics, and coordinated his fleet like a conductor with a symphony of destruction. Sextus's fleet? Decimated. What was once the greatest naval power in the western Mediterranean was reduced to floating debris. And with the ships went everything else. Sextus started losing more than battles. He lost allies and ports and trust. The charisma that once fed his legend now looked suspiciously like stubbornness. The people who once praised him as the bread bringer began to mutter about how maybe piracy wasn't such a great national food strategy after all. It was like Game of Thrones Season 7 Daenerys, the hero who once broke chains now setting things on fire and losing fans. Or Ragnar from Vikings, drifting from legend to liability. By the end, Sextus was no longer the symbol of resistance. He was just another warlord out of moves, out of luck, and rapidly running out of ocean. And when public support vanishes, that's when you start to hear the sound of exile rolling in with the tide. After the disaster at Naulochus, Sextus Pompey did what any rogue antihero would do in a losing arc: he ran. He fled east, hoping to regroup or rebuild or maybe find a new alliance. Some place where his last name still carried weight. But this wasn't a heroic escape. It was more like watching the last act of a tragic play where the protagonist keeps moving, but the curtain's already falling. He tried reaching out to Marcus Antonius, yes, that Antony, of Cleopatra fame. In theory, they had a common enemy in Octavian. In practice, Antony didn't want to touch that radioactive alliance with a 10-foot spear. Sextus was damaged goods, a liability in a world rapidly polarizing between two titans of Roman power. So when Sextus docked in Asia Minor, looking for safe haven, what he found instead was betrayal. One of Antony's commanders, a man named Marcus Titius, arrested him almost immediately. No trial and no chance to plead. And of course no poetic last words on a balcony overlooking the sea. Just a quiet execution. Cold, quick, and entirely off script. Even for Roman standards it was brutal. And here's the eerie part, nobody protested. No riots, and no angry mobs throwing stones in the forum. No statues torn down in revenge. The man who once starved Rome and fed the people vanished from history like he'd never mattered. It's the Dark Knight all over again. You either die a hero, or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Except Sextus didn't even get that dramatic third act. He just died, irrelevant. And Rome? Rome moved on. But this isn't just the end of a pirate's story. It's the point where we stop asking, what happened to Sextus? And start asking, what does this tell us about the system that erased him so easily? So let's rewind. Sextus Pompey wasn't just a rogue on a boat. He was the son of one of Rome's greatest generals, a political orphan tossed into chaos, and a pirate by necessity, not by nature. He didn't sack cities or burn temples. He just did the unthinkable. He cut off the bread. And that broke Rome. In a world of swords, he used scarcity as a weapon. In a city obsessed with military glory, he showed that power could come not from armies, but from anchoring a fleet in the right place at the right time. That's the uncomfortable truth his story forces us to confront. For all of Rome's grandeur, all of its marble pride and republican values, The whole system could be throttled by one man with a fleet and a strategy. Not through brute force, but through control of something far more basic. Food. It's not the kind of lesson Rome liked to write into its history books. That a pirate, a branded outlaw, once held its fate in the palm of his calloused hand. That the mighty republic had to bend the knee to someone outside the system. That the grain of Sicily was worth more than the gold of 1,000 senators. And maybe that's why Sextus had to disappear so completely. He wasn't just defeated, he was erased. Executed quietly, legacy buried, no monuments, no plays, no nostalgic speeches. Just silence. Because maybe Sextus Pompey didn't fail by challenging Rome. Maybe he failed by being better than Rome, at Rome's own game. And that's the kind of villain history can't afford to remember.